And so I thought we'd start this morning with a brief chat about what Bibles do you have? And Pastor Marina, as always, was right there. So, Pastor Marina, do you want to tell us again your favorite version and why you love that version?
This is my favorite version. It is. You can't read on the bottom because it's torn off. Not on purpose. Contemporary English version. And when I was a newbie, I could not understand a lot of what was being said or read via scripture. I wanted to know what that word meant, and this word meant, that word meant. And I had started out with the King James. And I'm like, okay, I know what this one means. I looked this one up. I looked that one up. And I think it was the Methodists that came out with this because that's where I got it at a Methodist bookstore. And I'm pretty sure they were selling, but it was very reasonably priced. And I bought 2 copies. And the other one has been loaned out. I don't even know who has it at this point. But the reason I like it is their translations help me see what is being aimed at. And they supposedly have put it in the contemporary English. Now, this was from 19, it wasn't 2000, it was 19 something. And I can't even get to the first page because they're all kind of stuck together here. Hold on. 1995.
Yep.
1995. So.
And it was published by the American Bible Society.
Oh, there you go. Thank you. Yes, ABS. The latest one, of course, is the NRSV EU, which is what this is.
UE, updated.
I'm sorry. It is, yes. UE, updated version. Yes. Took me a long time to find that definition. But there's an article, and I can make a this was printed by the Hendrickson's Bibles, which I'm not too sure about them. Yeah. But anyway, but it was the American Bible Society's literature end. They were the ones that were behind doing this, but they brought in a whole lot of other people from different denominations, different faiths, in order to come up with this. So, and there's supposed to be 12,000 changes. I haven't found them.
Right. So. Because how many words do we think are in the Bible? A lot. So trying to find 12,000 needles in a haystack of needles. Yeah.
Good luck.
So, Pastor Marina, what I hear you saying is the value in that contemporary English version for you was that you could read the Bible and understand what it was saying. That while the King James version we've talked about before is beautiful poetry.
Yes.
Sometimes its archaic language makes it difficult for us to understand in our modern context. So we might choose translations because they speak to us, literally speak to us in a way that we can understand.
Correct.
And then you were talking about the NRSV UE. What we are still using here for our readings in worship is the NRSV. Mainly because we get that from the a thing called Sundays and Seasons, which the ELCA offers an online service that we can bring down the readings and the liturgy and things like that to create our services.
So in a sense that the ELCA recommends that this is the one. I mean, how did it end up here?
So the NRSV has been the recommended Bible for the ELCA because it's at least from a scholarship point of view considered the most accurate translation. And I think, as Marina was saying, with the updated edition, that's supposed to be even more accurate, that it has had such a broad set of people looking at it, but even with the 12,000 changes, it's still not significantly like, it's not a whole version different that, we'd want to jump ship right away, but it is also considered a valid addition. And here we have Miss Stephanie.
The changes,
Yeah,
the changes are harder to find.
yes,
So, I mean, if you think you're going to read them just because, you're trying, no, you'll see the same thing. It's like, well, where are they? Because I've read a bunch of them and nothing. Okay. And oh, there's one.
right.
And I think all in all, I've got 6. So it's
Yeah.
not many that I found.
So how about anybody else have a favorite?
I have a
version or
question for Marina first. Did those 6 that you found make any appreciable difference in your understanding, or is it just you noticed it was a different word?
No, it did not.
Okay.
No, it did not.
Yeah.
My Bible was I was about 10. I got a gift of a Bible. It was called the Schofield Reference Bible. And it was a wonderful book for me. You could look up words, you could find any place. If you were looking, and later as a musician, if I was trying to find an anthem that went with, I could find text that went with a certain word or premise. And I found it very, I still have it. It's still probably my most used Bible. And I just got this new one because I really was fascinated by the fact that I had never read any of the apocryphal books.
Yeah.
So I haven't gotten very far in this yet. It's been a busy week, but and this, I like the text of this. It's very clear. And I grew up with the King James Version. I mean, I think that we grew up with it enough so that it didn't present a problem linguistically. I mean, it was really in our family. And the language was very, in our background somehow. I know I'm not as old as King as that sounds, but it was it was something in our family.
Okay, good.
I'm not
Anybody
very
else?
sophisticated when it comes to Bibles. I have three favorite Bibles. My most favorite is in Norwegian, and I got it when I was confirmed. So
Aw.
it's a long time ago. And the next one is the study Bible, the blue one I got from Marina.
Mhm.
You remember
That's
that,
the Lutheran,
Marina?
right? The
That-
Lutheran Study Bible.
The
Lutheran Study
Lutheran Study Bible. I got
Yes.
it from Marina long time ago.
That's a good one.
That's a very good one. So
That is.
that's the one I use when I, let's say, work on the Bible. But
Okay.
when it comes to just reading, I prefer to read in Norwegian because I'm
Yeah.
more familiar with the language.
Right.
And the third one is the one we bought at St. Luke in honor of the lady, Marina, the guy who passed away now, his mother. What was his
Yeah.
name?
Ellen. No.
No.
Bob Tuck's mom?
Bob's mother.
Peggy.
They gave money to St. Luke, and we used the money to buy Bibles. I still think you have it in the pews.
The Good News Bible.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's my 3 Bibles. And
Yeah.
I have a question to you. When you say it's closer to the original, what do that means? To me, I don't think we have an original Bible.
Correct. Right. Right.
Thank you, Lasse.
That's why I always precede it, Lassa, with saying, the scholars say this is the most accurate translation.
Yeah.
Since I'm not a Bible expert either. Yes, the original Hebrew certainly no longer exists. There are pieces, right, of the Greek,
Papyrus.
because
Yes.
what has become our New Testament, because that is a more, it's still 2,000 years ago, but it's
Exactly.
more modern. But I would say, yes, based on the original documents that they have, scholars have agreed that the translation and the approach to translating those words you know, have varying levels of accuracy. And,
Yeah.
and
So
so that's,
you
yeah.
basically refer to the Greek version.
yes, yes.
But
Yeah.
Yes.
there is an additional one, which one of our members, actually from St. Luke's, and Jacoby, pointed out a long time ago, because Jesus spoke Aramaic,
Right.
and the amount of knowledge we have about Aramaic would not fit. I mean, we have so little knowledge about Aramaic. But in some of the pieces that she found, there were differences. And so she said, if you want to be extremely accurate, you know, you need to learn Aramaic first and then do the
And that's why we rely on biblical scholars.
exactly. Yeah.
But you know, at least for me, I will probably pass away before I can start complaining about the Bible. So, so I try to understand that. One thing I understand is that when we translate it from Greek to the English church, we made a lot of mistakes because it was a lot of politics in
Yes.
England. And
Yeah.
they didn't like exactly what I was reading, so they used their own opinion.
Right.
One example is that in the original Bible, they say a young mother for Maria,
A young woman. Yeah.
a young woman, and in English translation, that becomes virgin.
Right.
Right.
And that is
Yeah.
a big question I struggle with all the time. What
Yeah.
should I really believe? And it make more sense to me a young woman than virgin, because do we have any proof at all that she was virgin?
Right. And does it matter? Right. I mean, a whole lot of belief systems were hinged on she had to be a virgin.
She had to
But-
be. Right.
But I mean, we believe that with God, nothing is impossible. So, I mean, to me, then, you know,
Yeah.
whatever God's plan is can happen.
That
Yeah.
was my question 2 weeks
Yes.
ago.
Yeah.
And it doesn't matter to me either. I mean,
Yeah.
the story
I
is
think-
good enough.
Story
I
is the
think it's a
story.
great
Yeah.
question. I think that's a great question. And Lassa, I think that also brings up the point of understanding that every time that the Bible is translated, people have to make choices. And in their, you know, in their word choices. And some might, you know, saying that the scholars think that it's the most accurate, I'm sure that there are some things that whether they went this way or this way, it would still be closer than any of us would be able to articulate a difference. And so one of the reasons that I think it's good to talk about the different versions of the Bible is to realize that that there are a whole variety of reasons that we like different versions of the Bible. Some of them speak to us. Some of them are beautiful poetry. Those may not be the beautiful poetry one, as you said, was translated definitely with an end in mind, right? With an agenda. Probably most translations of the Bible at least have some kind of approach. But it also points out that we could read, it's helpful to read in multiple different versions of the Bible to see, okay, well, how is this said in different ways? And see what is meaningful to us, right? How does it speak to us?
Yeah.
And I think you brought up the Good News Bible. That is known as a paraphrase Bible. So it is not a straight translation. It is someone's interpretation from a translation of the Bible. So they read a version of the Bible that has been translated, and then they re-say it in their own words. So the Good News Bible is one of those. The Message is one of my
Message.
favorites. Because
Eugene
it just
Peterson.
yeah, Eugene Peterson. I mean, it just, to me, it speaks to me because it sounds like someone speaking to me. And so even paraphrases have their place. Because sometimes when we hear things just a slight bit different, it sparks
Gives us
something for us, right?
But isn't
Um,
that the whole point, Deacon, that the Bible is speaking to you? If you feel that the Bible is speaking to you, I think you have the right Bible.
Yeah. Yeah.
I have a comment and a
Good point,
question.
Lassie.
All right, Louise has a comment and question.
My first comment is when I was a teenager, my Lutheran church moved from the King James Version to the Good News Bible.
Yeah.
And I was so disappointed
It's a big
because,
jump.
yeah, my Sunday
That's a
school
big
teachers
jump.
can talk to me, but I want more than that from the Bible. So that's my comment. And then my question, in all of these translations, which I am not familiar with, was there any change in, for example, the Ten Commandments as they are given, any change in the Beatitudes as they were given? I mean, these are the things, I guess, the lessons, the Christian lessons that I'm looking for. Have any of those things changed appreciably in the translations, or are they still pretty much worded the same way?
I love that, Louise. So what I'm hearing you say, the big question is when we think about different versions of the Bible, are the core tenets, the core things that we believe and hold on to, are those things different depending on, minor variations in the wording? I think they remain, conceptually the same, but an interesting thing, just an interesting point. Martin Luther numbers the Ten Commandments differently than the rest of the Protestant church.
Because in the Hebrew Bible, they are numbered different.
Are we supposed to believe that number one is the most important? And
So
there you go.
he didn't just scramble them, to be fair. But what in
They're the same
particular,
commandments.
the last two commandments, thou shalt not covet, he split those into two. When most of the rest of the world treats them as one. At the beginning of the Ten Commandments, there's there is a command in there saying don't create any idols.
Mhm.
Well, we don't have that as one of the 10 listed out. It's sort of under the umbrella of, the God commandments. So I think that's where we have 10 because those
Number
last
gets
two were
thrown
split
out.
apart, and everyone else has 10 because they squish those two together and pull the idol one out. So I mean, still the overarching commandments are the same. They just happen to be numbered differently.
But if you look at Matthew and Luke, for example, and Luke has blessed are the poor, and Matthew has blessed are the poor in spirit. There is a different emphasis, not a different understanding per se, but a different emphasis on one translation over another. And that's what I've found. They emphasize
it's one telling in the other, right? I mean, it's the way two different gospel writers have seen it, and
Right.
then the translations just take it from there, right?
Exactly.
Yeah, because even before it's translated, we're hearing the perspectives of different people in the gospels, so even those stories aren't told the same.
Okay, my next question has nothing to do with translations, but I have very little history of the Bible. So you just talked about Matthew and Luke. Were they contemporaries?
Yes.
Belief is yes.
So we can take it. Yep.
Not exactly, but around the same time after Mark.
Yes.
Because for some reason I always think of Luke as being the younger man,
Oh.
which may or may not be true.
Well, and ironically, the name of the Gospels is not necessarily the name of the writer of that gospel. So
Right.
we know Mark was the first gospel that was written. Matthew, and we know this because Matthew and Luke both have pieces that are included in Mark. So there are some things that are in Mark and Matthew and Luke. But then there are also things that are in Matthew and Luke that aren't in Mark. So Matthew and Luke have some things that are consistent between them that aren't in Mark. and for whatever reason, that source that they got that from is called the Q source.
Q
And so
source, yeah.
there's another document out there that Luke and Matthew had access to, that they brought some things in from that. So there are some things that are in there that are not in Mark. And then John is all its own different
Yes.
thing. But
John was
yeah,
later, time wise.
John was later and on a completely different.
Different island, different island. Patmos Island was all by itself.
Yeah. But the writer of Luke also writes Acts. So in the original, Luke and Acts would have been back to back to each other. Because they were written by the same person and to the same person. And so in our Bible, we get Matthew, Mark, Luke, John's jumps in there, and then Acts. And so I think that also makes it more confusing to know that Luke and Acts are from the same author. So back to translations. Anybody else have a favorite version? Oh, and don't let me forget that we're going to come back around to study Bibles and reference Bibles in addition to our translations. Anybody else have favorite translations of the Bible?
I love the King James version, not for accuracy, but because it's beautiful.
Yeah.
And I'm attuned to language.
Mhm.
It's just my background.
And I think that's a perfectly reasonable reason to want to read it and hear it, because it sounds beautiful. What about you, Stephanie? You got anything?
I'm always looking at the role of the women. And so I like the newer translations because they're a little bit more even-handed
Yeah.
between men and women.
Yeah. So could you guys hear Stephanie?
Not
Yeah.
quite.
Missed the first part.
So Stephanie says she's always paying attention to the role of women in the story, and she likes the newer translations because the language is more egalitarian, right? So it's not just man.
And submission and obedience and all this stuff
Correct.
expected from women. Yeah.
Yeah, some of that's still in there, but
Yeah.
Yeah.
I gloss over that part.
yeah, then we get to the Thomas
Oh,
Jefferson
patriarchy
version
thing.
of the Bible where he cuts out all the parts that he doesn't like. I don't like this part. I'll just cut that out.
It was a holy Bible in a whole new sense.
That's right. That's right. So there are lots and lots of different Bibles, and I have a few handouts. If anybody is interested, I am happy to share them. And they're under there. I taught a course one time on which Bible should I buy, right? When we select. So just out of interest, the King James Version was released in 1611. So indeed, Ida, you are not old enough to.
No one here is.
Neither
I'm
I'm
am I.
working on it.
Still like it.
That's
Well,
700
because Ida had
years.
said earlier, she's like, no language.
No, only 400 years. Okay.
And then the revised standard version is next on my list in 1952.
52. Yeah.
And then there's a Phillips Bible, which I have,
Yes, that's
the New Testament in
paraphrase.
modern English. Yes. And that was in 1958. Then we have the New American Standard Bible, which says that was by American Evangelicals. It's
Right.
an example of applying the verbal equivalence to the task of translation. So I suppose that's sort of a listen and how does it sound? And the NASB is a translation for the serious student of the Bible because the translation follows the ancient text as closely as possible, including the word order and word repetition. So sometimes, when translations, if the word order is the same, it's not going to sound right to us because the whole grammar is different.
Putting the verbs at the end.
Exactly. So that was in 1971. The Living Bible, which is one of the Bibles that was in my house growing up.
That's
and
the one
that
Karen
also-
reads.
That was also 1971. And that is a paraphrase Bible.
Is that the one
So
with the saxophones and the psalms? Oh,
I probably. So interestingly, it's a rephrase from the King James Version.
I didn't realize that.
I didn't
Okay.
realize.
So I just think that's interesting. So it says that it was very popular when it appeared in the early 1970s. It appealed to people who still thought of the King James Version as the only authoritative Bible. Because yes, I think many people have been raised that, God spoke in the King James Version.
English,
Bible.
yeah.
That is clearly
Like God that we do.
that is clearly God's preferred language. And so it says the Living Bible is less accurate than modern translations when one compares it to the original languages. I mean, partly because it's based on the King James Version. Then the New International Version,
NIV,
I know
yeah.
the NIV, that was 1973. Let's see, the Good News Bible was 1976. The New King James Version is 1982. The NRSV was 1989. The Message was 1993. And as Marina said earlier, the Common English Version, 1995. And then there's a Common English Bible, CEB, like boy,
I've seen
and that
that.
was published in 2011. So what it says is it's faithful to the original biblical languages, but it strives for translations that make sense in Common English.
Okay.
Common English.
Yeah. So it says, thus, Lord of hosts becomes Lord of heavenly forces. Interesting.
Huh?
And man,
Star Wars effect.
yeah, well, and get
So
that.
hosts
and-
are heavenly forces. Okay.
And mandrakes become erotic herbs. Now,
What is
for those Harry Potter people, mandrakes have they're a whole different thing. Anyway, so I just think that's interesting. The sort of that each version actually does have its own spin, right? That it's looking
Yeah.
for,
Yeah.
and that will guide the word choices. And I think it's helpful to kind of know what that is when we're looking at that, so that we can ask questions. Because I think one of the most important things that we do is ask questions.
So it sounds like in the 50s, there was a lot of translations everybody wanted to do. And then in the 70s, there was a revival of that. And we haven't done a lot since.
Yeah. And then a few in the 80s,
Some in the 90s. Yeah.
the early
So,
90s.
well, then
But yeah,
2011 is a shock.
yeah.
I
And
didn't-
then the NRSVUE was, did we decide
That's
that was
last year?
2022?
last
think.
year.
2022 or 2023. Yeah. Well, and I think
I'm
part of
looking
that
recent.
was the scholarship on the Bible, access to things
2022.
like the Dead Sea Scrolls. Those were all coming available at that time. And so there was kind of a renewed interest in translation.
Gee, what does this tell us?
Yeah. Yeah. How does this compare to what we thought before? I think Lasse also brought up that he has the Lutheran Study Bible. So study Bibles will be a translation of the Bible, right? So they're all any study Bible will be one of the translations of the Bible. But then it also has additional notes about what things might mean. It might have maps and timelines and extra information. I think the Lutheran Study Bible in each book of the Bible, it has a little page on when it was written or when they think it was written and who they thought wrote it and why, and kind of a background about each book. And as Lasse said, when we're digging into the meaning of things, that can be really helpful. One of the things that I learned the hard way is that study Bibles all have embedded theology. Because
Yes.
study Bibles were written, the notes and things are written by people who are interpreting what is in the Bible, in that version of the Bible, and then they're giving their thoughts on it.
And I have a
Yeah.
perfect example for you.
Yeah, go ahead.
Anybody that knows Joni how do you say it? Tadarickson? She's the disabled woman who was painting and writing with her teeth.
Right. Yeah,
And if you see her signature, that may make her look familiar. Joni and Friends did this one, which is called the Encouragement Bible. And one of the sections they have is questions for the Valley. Oh, yeah. In the Valley, questions in the Valley. It's not from or to, it's in
Yeah.
the Valley. They have other, I mean, they do questions in the Valley, the entire book to show basically questions in the high places too. To show how emotions fit in there and how negative thinking can send you in different places. So this one is, I've recommended this on a number of occasions because it's really good. And yes, it is paraphrasing. I mean, that is part of what they do. And there's a whole thing about Joni Eareckson Tada. But and I am not even pronouncing it right. Eareckson. But I think she did a really good job on this one. And she's an example of a kind of study Bible that's aimed at, the emphasis is on people that have trials, have tribulations, have, disabilities.
Yeah.
So.
And there are a variety of study Bibles that are available. The way I learned the hard way, was I didn't know that there were multiple different versions of study Bibles. So I found an NRSV study Bible and I bought it. And I started reading the notes and I thought, what? Oh, this doesn't sound right. And so it took me a while to even realize, like, wait a minute, I don't think this is what we believe. Well, yeah, because it was not from sort of a mainline Protestant perspective. And so there was some stuff that was pretty radical in the explanations of, like, the submission kind of thing. Like, yes, absolutely. Wives sign up to submit to their husband. I'm like, wait a minute. So asking questions and being aware that not all study Bibles are the same, which I did not know, is just another layer on the, we have translations and then we have people's interpretations of those translations. And so I have multiple study Bibles. And so it's really fun to, like, look at how different people sort of see things.
It makes me think of a cartoon that I love as an English teacher. And the student said, well, what is the bluebird? And the English teacher went on to say, well, it's the bird that appears over the mountain and it indicates happiness, and it swoops and it comes down on folks. And then the student went and said to the author, well, what is the bluebird? And the author said, it's a North American bird that's painted blue.
That is an excellent example. Yeah. Excellent.
That'll put you in your position.
Yep. And since we have no access to the original writers of the Bible, all we've got is people's
Different
Yeah.
people.
This is what it means.
Yes.
Yeah.
I often think that the original writers, I mean, they had to be putting their imprint of the way they viewed life into their translations.
Yeah.
So when we read something, you have to realize that there's wiggle room.
Yeah.
And they were speaking to different audiences. Like
Right.
Matthew had a different audience than Luke had.
Right.
Matthew was definitely speaking to a Jewish audience. So he did emphasize the connections with the Old Testament. Luke didn't emphasize the connections with the Old Testament because his audience was more than likely Gentile.
Yeah, Romans.
So,
Yeah. Good. All right. Well, we've used our half hour plus a little bit. We have scratched the surface on translations. If anyone is interested, like I said, I have a couple handouts that just give some more information on kind of the main translations of the Bible. I'm happy to make copies of them and make them available because they're just interesting.
Yeah.
So, what question should we explore next week?
Well, I had a meeting on Friday with the Christian Science Association in Washington, D.C.
Oh,
and it was eye-opening, and it gave me hope. It's no conflict between the Bible and the science. I think that's a very interesting topic, because we learn from the media today that it is a conflict between the Christian belief and the science belief. And I'm so glad we have a strong group in Washington who is building that bridge between the Bible and the science.
I thought for a minute you were talking about Christian Scientists, for whom I sang for 5 years when I was really broke. But let me tell you, we don't have a connection to Christian Scientists.
right. Yeah, we can, I mean, we can absolutely talk about how does science and the Bible relate to each other. You want to do that next week?
Yeah, that would be great.
All right, let's do that.
Does that mean we'll be talking about evolution versus creation?
Well, so we'll talk about, what we'll talk about is in Genesis, where it says things are created, whatever, is that inconsistent with a scientific approach to understanding how the world was created? Yeah, that kind of thing. I mean, we're not going to touch on how could a virgin get pregnant. But yes, we'll talk about.
Well, if a
It
virgin is a
wasn't an
young
A for
woman,
a man.
yes, it could
Yeah,
happen.
no.
Well, I think it could be very interesting because it is so many people who struggle with this. People like, I will believe, Stephanie and me, who meet with a lot of science people, and they don't think that we are put together right, because we believe in something different. And to really meet with these people on Friday was giving me a lot of hope.
Oh, yeah. Just to be clear, Lutherans have no issue with science and the Bible. That it is not inconsistent to have evolution and the Big Bang and have the story in Genesis. So Lutherans don't have any issue with that at all. But there are a number of Christian sects, is what I'm going to call them, who stand strong and no, we did not evolve from monkeys. We were created as human beings. And as you said, Lassa, I think that is the perspective that is more often what gets publicized. The Scopes monkey trials. Oh no,
What's really bothered me is that you learn basically both in school and in media that you have to choose between religion or
And science, right.
and that's not the case.
Right. That's right.
Yeah.
Yep. Okay, so we'll do that next week. That sounds great. I love that. Thank you. All right.
Back in the 90s, I met a group of people that believe that the earth is only 10,000 years old. And they had this whole thing they were trying to persuade me, and they showed me a movie.
Yeah.
And
Yeah. And then we have the flat earthers that still exist. Yep.
It's back
So,
to
yeah.
taking all the words literally again.
Right.
7
Yep.
days means 7 days.
Yep.
Right.
They
Yes.
said here that it's 12 times 12, so that means
Right.
only 144,000 seats. 144,001, you're out.
Right.
So
Right.
no.
Yeah.